Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another round of paraphrasing. This lesson was kind of compiled after looking at some of your task boards and taking into account some things that you guys still need to be working on in order to make your paraphrases both efficient and accurate. Keep in mind throughout this video that I am going to be giving you some time in between just to read a few sources, and so I'll be pausing throughout, but also keep in mind that you can stop the video at any point in time if you need an extra few seconds to read any of the things that I put up on the screen. So first, I want to start out with this quote. This is what we're going to be using for the next few slides. It's taken from a New York Times article that you guys have already been introduced to. This is the same article that you guys paraphrased from Taylor Lorenz on task board number 1. So take a second and read this quote. So the first thing that we want to look at when we're paraphrasing, one thing that we noticed consistently throughout your task boards and throughout your paraphrasing is that you guys need a reminder that you need to be transforming the original quote. The point of paraphrasing is that you are interpreting and analyzing in a way that changes not the original meaning, but what the original quote looks like. So there's an element of transformation there, and this occurs through structure and through wording. Most of you are doing pretty well with one or the other, but we really need to focus on having you guys do both in order to create strong, accurate paraphrasing. So this is the original quote that you just read, and here is a paraphrased version of it. I will read it for you right now. Zoom video communications has risen in popularity this past week, attracting approximately 600,000 new users on Sunday, which Apptopia cites as the largest recruiting day in the app's young history, even though stock for many companies is plummeting. Zoom's market gains have reached $29 billion in 2020. So, as you can see in this paraphrase, this is a strong example of both changing the structure and the wording. So I've highlighted some of these different phrases or different words that have been changed. Instead of thrust into the spotlight, the student uses risen in popularity. Instead of people, they use new users. Biggest day ever, largest recruiting day in the app's young history. Stock market gains, those types of things. So the words are also, they're changed up completely so that you're not using the exact same terminology from the original quote. However, the structure has also been modified a bit in order to give it a new flair and kind of a reorientation for the reader. So you'll notice that we have a couple different dependent clauses in here. I've underlined this one for you. And you can notice that it has a different pattern and it has a different flow. The syntax is also very different. So not only is the wording changed here, but the structure is changed as well. Second thing you guys need to remember is that when you're paraphrasing, you must cite, and you must cite throughout your paraphrasing. What I mean by that is, even though you're supposed to be transforming the original quote here into your own wording, that does not mean that the paraphrase includes your own original thought. When you are citing or when you are paraphrasing something, you are getting that information from somewhere else. And therefore, even in transformation, you must cite it. So along with that, when you guys are paraphrasing, you're going to notice that most of your paraphrasing that you're doing is a little bit lengthy. And you're probably going to be using the sources that you have for multiple pieces of evidence, not just one. So when you're creating a paraphrase and you're compiling multiple pieces of evidence from an original quote, you can't just cite the author at the very end. The problem with this is that here I have at least a couple different sentences in this paraphrase. When I cite the author only at the end, it makes it seem like this whole sentence that I've written here came from my own brain. But as you can see, it totally different. It totally didn't. I got it from this original quote. So you need to make sure that you're being consistent, citing the author throughout the paraphrase, not just at the very end. And just as an additional piece of information, I have also created an in-text citations document for you on this week's task board. So if you're having any trouble figuring out how to include your in-text citations, keeping in mind that they are different depending on the sources that you're using, make sure that you take a look at that. And thirdly, when you're paraphrasing, you must remember that when you're transforming the original quote, that does not mean that you can transform the meaning of the quote. So we have the original right here. This is the paraphrase. I've highlighted this little phrase right here because in actuality, while this is a good attempt at paraphrasing, this right here misconstrues the meaning of the original. It says, Zoom's market gains have reached 29 billion in 2020, whereas the original quote says, Zoom shares have soared this year, valuing the company at 29 billion. So even though this seems like an accurate paraphrase, it's actually not, because what you're saying here is that the market gains just for 2020 have reached 29 billion. That is not correct. What is correct is that 29 billion is the net worth. That is what this original quote is talking about. It's saying that Zoom as a company is valued at 29 billion, not that it's increased 29 billion. That makes it sound like Zoom is actually worth more than the 29 billion from 2020. So you have to make sure that when you're transforming the original quote, you're not transforming the original meaning. So how I would change this is saying Zoom's market gains have, let's say, Zoom's market gains in 2020, because we want to include the year, in 2020 have resulted in a net worth of 29 billion. And net worth should have a hyphen there. So now it says Zoom's market gains in 2020 have resulted in a net worth of 29 billion. That shows that the total company's worth is 29 billion. Therefore, it is saying the same thing, just paraphrased in your own words from the original quote. So make sure that you guys are not transforming the meaning. Even though you're interpreting, even though you're providing your own analysis, you don't want to be spreading misinformation about an original source. So the next thing I want to talk to you guys about is paraphrasing. There are two different levels that we have seen you guys paraphrasing at, and we're trying to get everyone to a level 2. However, some of you will be operating at a level 1, and that's okay. The point here is that we want to really push all of you guys in your writing to get to a level 2 paraphrase. So what is a level 1 and a level 2 paraphrase? Level 1 is the basic transformation. So everything that we talked about last week, where you're providing your own analysis, you're changing the structure, you're including the author somehow, you're doing the in-text citation, all that jazz. And when you are creating a lengthy paraphrase, what is typically going to happen in a level 1 is that you have a 3-step process. You're introducing the evidence, whatever the sources that you're using. You're paraphrasing that evidence using all of the basic criteria. And then you're using a this shows that statement, such as this is where the analysis comes in. So this quote shows that da 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 da, and you relate it back to your research question. This is okay, but the problem with this is that it's very formulaic. And so while it will help you make sure that you have all the pieces in place for accurate and efficient paraphrasing, it's not necessarily strong, elevated writing. So the goal is to get to a level 2 form of paraphrasing. And that's when you're transforming and you're also analyzing throughout. So this is where your own interpretation and your own understanding really, really comes into play. In a level 2 paraphrase, you are meshing the evidence from the original source with your own understanding as you're paraphrasing. So instead of doing one and then the other at the end and kind of tagging it on, you are doing this consistently through. And this will help your writing become more seamless and also more balanced. So I'm going to show you guys a couple different examples of a level 1 and then a level 2. So this is the same original quote that we just worked with. Take a couple minutes and read this level 1 paraphrase. Think to yourself, how is it resembling this right here? Introduction, paraphrase the evidence, this shows that. Take a couple seconds. Okay. So the reason that this is a level 1 paraphrase is because we have this very formulaic structure happening right now. I've included the introduction of the evidence highlighted in green and also the analysis at the end highlighted in pink. So what we have here is the paraphrasing, and this is an okay paraphrase. Whoops, I don't know why this is cited twice here. That was weird. But this right here is totally fine. You can see that the student has cited the author throughout. You can see that they've changed the original language and the structure of what's going on from the original quote. But again, it is very formulaic because whoever this student is starts out with Lorenz's article suggests that, right? So you're introducing the evidence right away in a way that is too obvious and is not bringing in your own analysis, right? This doesn't do anything to actually interpret. All it does is say, here's the evidence, here's how I'm going to paraphrase it, and then in pink, here's what I think about it. And also, again, it's very formulaic because this evidence suggests that blah, 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 right? That's not exactly an elevated way to write. So we want, while this is okay, this is a good place to start, especially if paraphrasing is difficult for you. We're trying to get everyone more in the process of a level 2. So I'm going to show you what a level 2 paraphrase looks like. Take a couple seconds to read this through and see what you notice about it that's different from the first one. So this is more of a level 2 because you can see, as I've highlighted here for you in pink, that this person, whoever this student is, analyzes throughout the paraphrase. Not only do they analyze throughout the paraphrase, but even though this introduces the information, because right away we know that we're going to be talking about Zoom as a technological platform, this person doesn't do what the previous person does, where they say Lorenz's article, yada, da, 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 right? He keeps us in the midst of the writing, and he keeps us in the midst of the major themes, the major points that they're trying to point to, right? And so this automatically from the get-go begins a certain level of analysis. And then you can see throughout, the paraphrasing is actually really concise, right? This person doesn't go on and on, so they don't include all of the information from the original quote. They just include what is necessary for their purposes. So when you look at what is actually paraphrased, it's honestly either equal to or less than what they analyzed. So this is a really, really strong way to paraphrase because it is seamless. The analysis is written and interwoven all throughout, but also you're not relying solely on this information. You're building off of it. And the point is that your writing is getting stronger because you are interpreting and you're showing the reader your ethos, your credibility as you are writing throughout because you're analyzing throughout. So now I'd like to practice with you guys what this looks like. Take a couple seconds, read this quote. This is also taken from the Taylor Lorenz New York Times article. So let's practice. On the left-hand side, I've included the original quote here. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to take some notes. You can do this mentally if you feel like you're doing a pretty strong job of paraphrasing already. However, it is really, really helpful to just jot down some notes as you're paraphrasing. We all love a good bullet point, so you can just use some of those right in there. So based on this original quote, a couple of the things that instantly I want to talk about, the things that I think are most important from this, are talking about post-coronavirus, right? Because we are looking at the state of Zoom, the state of these kind of platforms after all of the hysteria goes away. What's going to happen? Are we going to be using this type of technology after we're no longer social distancing and self-quarantining? So post-coronavirus and also platform maintenance. How is this going to be maintained throughout the rest of time, right? Is this going to become something that is a main staple for people to use rather than just out of convenience for this time being? Another thing that I notice in this quote that I think is particularly important is they talk a lot about students, they talk about Gen Z. So, just to kind of summarize what that means to me, I think younger generations is a good way to include that there. And then what are we talking about? Like, why are we talking about the younger generation? What do they want out of a platform like this? Talks about direct messaging and it talks about editing tools, right? So, right off the bat, I think that that's talking about access. That's just a way to summarize what it's talking about without using the direct terminology, right? Younger generations want something that's efficient and they want something that's going to give them accessibility to their friends or to online services, whatnot. Another thing that it talks about is more funny face filters, kinds of stickers, live video effects, right? All of these things kind of signal to me more a sense of like personability, right? So we're talking about personable or relatable features on the Zoom platform. And then ultimately, because we're talking about, well, if Zoom is personable and if it's relatable, if it provides access to younger generations, then the thing that I see the author talking about as most important in this particular quote is the idea of connection and the idea of entertainment, right? Because this is all about, well, going forward, even though we're not going to be in this coronavirus madness, what is important to younger generations is accessible and entertaining technology. If Zoom can continue to be that kind of a platform for younger online users, then that can be just as important and just as uh, prolifically used for the younger generations, such as Gen Z, and they can use it just as much as they're potentially using TikTok or Snapchat. So now that I have these basic ideas of what I kind of want to include, I'm going to go down here and I'm just going to include my notes at the bottom. These are like really, really big. So I'm going to make them a little bit smaller so that I can see them one at a time. So we've got post-coronavirus, platform maintenance, younger generations, access, personal or relatable features, and connection or entertainment. This part right here is my analysis, right? This is what I have interpreted from the original quote. So, as we're paraphrasing, keeping in mind these are the types of things that we want to include, we also want to change the structure and the wording of the original quote. So I would start off by saying something like bringing in this idea of coronavirus, right? After it's over. So I'd probably say beyond the realities of, I don't know, what does coronavirus involve? Probably remote learning and shelter in place mandates. Because if I do this, then I'm also not saying specifically coronavirus or anything about social distancing, right? I've basically said the same thing, but in a different way. So, beyond the realities of remote learning and shelter in place mandates, Zoom corporate officials like Lucas Moiseev. Right, I want to include Lucas Moiseev because he was cited in the original quote saying these things about Zoom. So I don't necessarily have to quote him, but I can say generally along the same lines what he said. So Zoom corporate officials like Lucas Moiseev anticipate that the platform, let's say software, will maintain its AIM popularity and let's end the sentence right there. So we have to cite. So make sure that your author is in parentheticals and also before the period. So first sentence, beyond the realities of remote learning and shelter-in-place mandates, Zoom corporate officials like Lucas Moiseev anticipate the software will maintain its popularity. So already right away, I've talked about platform maintenance and I've talked about what's going to happen post-coronavirus. So now I want to bring in order to make this seamless, right? I want to kind of bring in my own analysis. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about like the connectivity of it. What is it that makes people use these platforms? So I'm going to say individuals have sought to eliminate distance as a problem, let's say barrier to social relationships long before coronavirus and will continue to do so after its threat subsides. So this analysis is important because I'm saying that the reason that this person, whatever his name is, Lucas Moiseev, the reason that he's saying that Zoom will be a mainstay is because people are always trying to figure out connectivity, right? This is nothing new just because coronavirus has made us all stay inside. I mean, people have been using Skype and FaceTime and things like that long before the virus ever surfaced. So we know that that's important to human beings. So now I'm connecting this idea of Zoom as something that can bring this connectivity into the writing. And now I want to talk more about this younger generation that we talked about right here and access and personable or relatable features. So I'm going to say, by implementing increased accessibility and more personable aspects will appeal to youthful users. Right? Yeah, it works. Zoom could become a household name. Okay. Oh, and don't forget, I didn't get this information by myself just because I transformed it. So you got to write the author's name. So here I've talked about accessibility and I've talked about the personable aspect of it as well. And I also brought in the idea of younger users. And last but not least, now that I have talked about the parts that I really wanted to get in, now I just kind of want to like wrap it up, talking about not just connectivity, but also entertainment, because that's what's going to make Zoom stay, right? That's what's going to make it important to people beyond social distancing. So in this way, Zoom would serve a dual role, a valuable communication tool and a source of entertainment. Oh, and hopefully you learn how to spell correctly. Awesome. So now we have our paraphrase. We've taken the main ideas from this and we've included them in the original paraphrase. However, we also have our own analysis all throughout. So I will highlight it for you just to see what the final product is. So even here you can see, all right, I've used bits and pieces from the original, but it's fairly balanced. It's seamless because my analysis is interwoven throughout, and also it balances out what I'm interpreting from the quote and makes sure that the information that I am getting from the original is cited correctly. So make sure that you guys are practicing this. Keep in mind, this is a level 2. If you're still working through this and you don't feel so confident, this formulaic style of a level 1 is still acceptable, but ultimately we're going to be pushing you guys to try to get to this place. So continue to be on the lookout. Do not forget to also take a look at the in-text citations handout, and happy writing.